Hello everybody, welcome to another commentary video. Today we're doing Julius Caesar. I have my cup of coffee, I got my notes, and I got my Terraria gameplay. So let's just get into it. But before we begin, I want to mention a few things. I do a lot of research for these videos. I mean, not like a lot, but you know, I try to do a fair amount and do these videos justice. And in doing so, I watch a lot of YouTube videos. And a few of the ones I want to mention right off the bat are Lit Laugh Life. They did a whole playlist about, you know, the tragedy of Julius Caesar, and it's really a great guide on analyzing Shakespearean and Elizabethan language and interpreting it. Historia Civilis, they did a great video on the assassination itself, which really helps you to visualize it, know all the planning that went into it. I mean, it wasn't just like, you know, we got to kill Caesar. We need to kill him in a place where it's public, where it's safe to do so because Caesar had armed guards, and where they could keep Mark Antony away. And that's not really explored in the play, but it is in the video, which is, you know, great. And Overly Sarcastic Productions, they did a video on Caesar, and it's a great summary. I always watch one of their videos whenever I try to understand a really complicated book. They did a great video on Paradise Lost, which really helped me deal with that book because it was mainly poetry. And I watched this one before. And I also mentioned that one because in my video, I used the song Coldplay. I used a song by Coldplay, Viva La Vida, and I rewatched their summary video so I could, you know, come into this commentary with some fresh knowledge. And at the end of their video, they play Viva La Vida, and I was like so afraid that it would seem like I had plagiarized them or just, you know, taken their thing. But, you know, I'm trying to do my own thing. I just want to make that clear. But please watch their videos. I mean, they're just a lot of great creators. Another thing I want to talk about is why I put songs in my videos in the first place. Well, I just think they're cool. I mean, I love music and I love sharing my music with you guys, but also I love that sometimes I'll find a perfect song that kind of parallels what I'm talking about perfectly. In the 1984 video, you had Every Breath You Take by The Police, which is perfect. You know, it's about this jealous, possessive ex-lover who won't let go of the woman. And it's, you know, Big Brother. There's a great parallel there. With, you know, the Julius Caesar. With the Mice and Men video, I had Cruel World by Willie Nelson. And it is a cruel world that they live in. So that was nice too. With the Julius Caesar video, I did Coldplay Viva La Vida, because I thought that it thematically fit. I actually was going to do the Minecraft one, Fallen Kingdom, because I actually listened to that a lot more. I had never heard the original until I, you know, used it for the video. But it's a beautiful song. It's about, well, I got this from a YouTube comment, so I could be completely wrong. But I think it's about the death of King Louis, or the lost words of King Louis the something. I don't remember the letters in the title. But, you know, they kill him. And he looks back on the days where he used to rule the world, as Julius Caesar does. But now, you know, he built his kingdom on this pillar of salt that shifted, which I think relates to public opinion. Overall, I think it's great, and so I just wanted to, I guess, talk about that. So let's get into it. We're going to get some materials, because today we're going to build an arena, a Roman Colosseum, to go with the Julius Caesar whole aesthetic and whatever. As you can see, the house has got a couple more visitors, and I've done some stuff in the meantime. Our commentary world is blossoming. But yeah, let me get some stuff. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is women in Julius Caesar, because women in Julius Caesar are largely ignored. There's only 2 women in the play, and they're both Brutus's and Caesar's wives, Portia and Calpurnia. The first thing we're told of Calpurnia, through the lips of Caesar himself, is that she's barren, and she must be touched by a great man, Antony, as he runs to the race in order to bear a child, according to some Roman tradition. Okay, Caesar, have you ever thought that maybe you might be infertile? No, the thought never crosses his mind, because from the get-go, this is clearly a man's world, and we see this later when Portia speaks to Brutus. She knows he's got something on his mind, the assassination of Caesar, and she wants to share his burden. She begs him to speak to her, but he refuses because he fears she will gossip, as is her womanly nature. And I believe later in the play, when Brutus does tell her, she echoes this belief, saying to herself, "Oh, I have the mind of a man but the mettle of a woman," which I think shows you how when you live in a society where the only language is in terms of masculinity, it's hard for femininity to plant roots. Which sucks, because if Caesar had actually listened to his wife and stayed home like he originally wanted to, he wouldn't have gone a day without being turned to Swiss cheese. But instead, he allows some dude to tell him, "Really, man, you're gonna listen to your wife?" and instead dies for his pride, like a real man. The next question is whether or not Brutus's idea of a republic is truly realistic. And to tell you the truth, I have no idea. I mean, I'm not a political science major or anything, I'm just some dude who reads books, so please take my words with a grain of salt. But as we spoke about in our Mice and Men video, oftentimes men chase dreams that are just that, dreams. I mean, I for one live in a republic and it's not all that great. I mean, maybe we're just too big for our own damn good, but it's easy to feel like you don't have any individual power, whilst groups and corporations form monopolies over the free market and change the rules in their favor. I mean, you know, it's easy to feel like maybe with a man like Caesar in charge, things would actually get done. But as we see in the play, power often corrupts. And even if Caesar was truly good, his position would eventually be occupied by somebody not so good. And even if there was an organization in charge, we've seen in 1984 that that's not so great either. So it's difficult. There really is no perfect solution. I mean, even if you came up with one today, the world could look infinitely different tomorrow. But it's here where we can actually learn something from Cassius and Brutus. For even if they did manage to fuck up date night, at least they managed to do something about it, instead of just licking Caesar's boots. We have to try, and hope we make the world a little bit better. I can say that at least. So with that out of the way, let's break this up like my favorite John Green novel, and separate the book into two parts. Before Caesar's death, consisting of Acts 1 and 2, and after, with Acts 3, 4, and 5. Act 1 is mainly used for exposition. In Scene 1, we have all of Rome celebrating Caesar's victory over Pompey, whom after years of civil war, Caesar had finally defeated. And despite once cheering for Pompey, the people clamor for Caesar. This sets up a few ideas. One, that the people are easily swayed, and really only care about themselves. We have a little wordplay here about a cobbler who mentions that yes, he's celebrating because he loves Caesar, but he also knows that the people will wear out their shoes, and he'll be able to fix them. This is echoed later in Act 3 when Antony gives the eulogy, and the final nail in the coffin for the people to turn against Brutus is when Antony mentions that Caesar promised them money. And two, that Caesar might be a tyrant. After this scene, the two men are thrown into prison and never heard from again for the rest of the play. In the next scene, we meet the oh so great and powerful Caesar, who is shown to be very prideful. And this is reflected in the fact that he's dead in 1 year. It's a metaphor for how Caesar manages to always convince himself that he's loved and respected by all and ignores all signs otherwise, like the soothsayer in the street. Cassius also pulls Brutus to convince him to join the conspirators. We, the audience, can obviously tell that Cassius is envious of Caesar. When he speaks of dishonor, we see it as envy. But when he chooses his words carefully, Brutus interprets his message as one that strives to restore the honor of Rome that Caesar has claimed for himself. However, we're immediately asked to question this idea that Caesar is ambitious and self-serving when we hear that he denies the crown thrice and immediately passes out. This can be interpreted in a number of ways. For one, as I've mentioned before, perhaps Caesar does not believe himself worthy of being king due to his epilepsy. Or perhaps he's trying to gauge the reaction of the crowd and win their favor by denying the crown a couple times before accepting it. Or perhaps the crown itself, which attention is drawn to the fact that it's not a crown of a king, but a coronet, is not big enough, and Caesar has his eyes set on the grand prize. But either way, we know it's not going to end good. Act 1 finishes with a prophetic scene, with earthquakes, lightning, and people on fire. A lion is roaming the streets. It could very well mean nothing, or it could foreshadow the destruction to come in Act 5. The biggest takeaway is the idea that men often see what they want to see, and ignore all other evidence to the contrary. Act 2 is where we get the most debate and planning over the morality and purpose behind the assassination. And we begin with brooding Brutus in his orchard. He loves Caesar, but he loves Rome more, and he fears that the crown will change his friend's nature. But he cannot be sure, and he's only convinced when he finds Cassius' letters addressed from Brutus from the people. And Brutus believes it is in the best interest of the general public that a tyrant is removed before he comes into power, and therefore must kill Caesar. But my boy Brutus, how can you be so sure? Because despite acting in turmoil for this for a couple of days, when the conspirators come to his home, Brutus immediately begins acting like their leader, even telling Cassius a number of times that what they want to do will be too bloody, and that doing it his way is noble. Now of course, Brutus does believe that he's fighting for the good of Rome, and he is putting his own feelings and desires aside for that. But an idea I really want to get across in the video is that Brutus and Caesar are very alike, and one can almost picture Caesar in that moment dictating what is best for Rome, and ignoring the words of the men beneath him, for he is a great and virtuous man, as in his nature. And because Brutus is known for his nobility, therefore, an act of Brutus must be noble, and that's how he justifies murder. This parallel is not lost on Shakespeare, and the next scene revolves around Caesar. This is where he hears his wife's creepy dream, and he gets scared and tries to stay home. One of the conspirators tells him to stop being a bitch, and Caesar changes his mind, and he heads off to his death. Here Caesar ignores another warning, but it's interesting to note why he does it. Because the conspirator tells him that the senators want to crown him king, and therefore he puts his own feelings of fear aside to uphold the image as the fearless, immortal Caesar. But perhaps Caesar is also genuinely surprised at the offer, and maybe he's grateful to accept the honor of being elected king by the people he did not believe himself worthy to rule. And maybe that's part of the betrayal. Act 3 is the climax of the play, where we get the assassination and the aftermath. Caesar is brought to the Senate house. Everybody jumps him, and Brutus stabs him in the groin, which I guess is payback for sleeping with his mom, I guess. But in the play, this happens quickly in a few lines, and Caesar's last words are "Et tu, Brute?" or "You too, Brutus?" which really hammers in the betrayal. I'm sure it's not far-fetched to say that Caesar falls not from his wounds, but from the shock of seeing his friend among the conspirators. They wash their hands in his blood and proclaim liberty and freedom for all, and though their actions are violent, Brutus manages to spin them in a positive light, and all is well until Antony shows up carrying Caesar's corpse, and you know it's about to go down. Despite being limited in what he can say about Caesar and the conspirators, he manages to get the public to question the conspirators' idea that Caesar was ambitious, reminding them of all he did for them. And when the public realizes, hey, these guys making some pretty good points, he tells them all that Caesar promised them money, and they go apeshit. Listen to this line: "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war." And that's exactly what happens. In the last scene of the act, a bunch of Romans imprison this random guy who had nothing to do with the assassination, just because he shares a name with one of the conspirators. In Act 4, after Rome turns on Brutus and Cassius, they flee and begin discussing strategy to take back Rome. There's conflict here, and maybe it's because Brutus has finally taken notice of Cassius' true nature. It's not made exactly clear what Cassius did, but put simply, he denied Brutus funding that he needed, and most likely got those funds through underhanded means. But the real high point of this chapter is that the ghost of Caesar appears before Brutus, and all he says to him is that he'll see him again at the Battle of Philippi. I think the ghost is supposed to be a manifestation of Brutus' guilt, as he calls himself "thy evil spirit, Brutus," and shows how Brutus is haunted by the consequences of the choice he made, which not only cost him the life of his father figure, but also his wife, who killed herself when they had to abandon Rome. We end the play in Act 5, and there's a lot of suicides here. I don't mean just Brutus and Cassius, but multiple dudes choose to fall on each other's swords instead of being taken captive, which reflects the values of the time, where high-ranking generals would kill themselves in order to atone for mistakes they had made. Think maybe King Saul in the Bible, or seppuku in Japan. But it's interesting to note that at the beginning of Act 5, Brutus gives his thoughts on suicide. "But I find it cowardly and vile, for fear of what might fall, so to prevent the time of life," which basically means I find it cowardly to try and escape your own death because you think it might happen. And yet he killed himself at the end of the play, and he's praised as noble. This here was a man. Brutus, for most of the play, is a hypocrite. He does things he does not agree with, associates with people who do not share his values, and murders his master because he feels he has to, for the country he loves. And much like he betrays Caesar, he's betrayed by the people he sacrificed so much for. But he had a good heart and noble intentions. Brutus, in his ego and ideology, lost sight of the reality of his own feelings and became so detached from the people who loved him that he cannot grieve for them when they are gone. When his wife dies, he tells himself that her death was cowardly, but he knows that's not the truth. He has to accept his mistakes and reclaim that part of him that died with Caesar. His ghost, his guilt, his doubt, his humanity, and for this, for his good heart and noble intentions, Brutus is praised.